Welcome to today's deep dive. We're diving right into the thick of it, how immigration's playing out in the current U.S. election scene. Got some interesting excerpts from a Fox News broadcast, and let me tell you, it's going to be juicy. Think unexpected stats and some really heated debates.
Always interesting to see how different outlets frame the conversation, especially this close to Election Day.
Right, and they didn't hold back. Jumped right in with a poll they did. Two-thirds of registered voters, and get this, a good chunk of non-white voters, are actually all for deporting undocumented immigrants. Surprised me, honestly. What do you make of that?
It's definitely telling. Seems like it strikes a nerve with a lot of voters, even across different backgrounds. It's like this Fox News report is tapping into something we don't always hear in the usual political chatter.
Yeah, like they're saying, hey, this is what people are really thinking, even if it's kind of taboo to say it out loud. And then they take it a step further. They contrast this public opinion with how the current administration's handling things. Even showed a clip of VP Harris seeming to dodge a question about the border crossings.
Classic framing tactic. They're highlighting what they see as a gap between what the administration's doing and what the people actually want. It feeds into that whole out-of-touch narrative that always seems to pop up during elections.
Totally. And this idea of the government overreaching, or at least people feeling that way, it's a recurring theme, you know? Which brings us to another hot-button issue. Election integrity. They didn't shy away from that either.
Definitely not. They honed right in on that controversy in Virginia. The governor's removing non-citizens from the voter rolls and facing some serious heat for it, lawsuits from the DOJ, the whole 9 yards.
It's weird, though, right? Because they mentioned that this process has been standard practice in Virginia for ages, like almost 2 decades, and under both parties. Makes you wonder why it's suddenly such a big deal now.
For sure. Shows how on edge everyone is about election integrity these days. Something that's normally just routine administration is suddenly thrown under the spotlight, framed as potentially disenfranchising voters and messing with the whole democratic process.
It's like every little thing, even something totally procedural, is being looked at through this super partisan lens. Makes even the most mundane tasks seem politically charged.
Absolutely. Which brings us to another crucial element this election, those key swing states. The blue wall, states that could very well decide the whole shebang.
Right. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, they all flipped for Biden last time. But get this, the report cited some recent polls, and apparently former President Trump's got a slight lead in those states now. What do you think? Could we see another 2016?
It's definitely possible. Shows how unpredictable things are, how the political winds can shift, especially in those states.
And like former President Trump knows it too. They mentioned his campaign strategy, how he's willing to hold rallies, even in places where you might not be so popular. It's like he's saying, I'm not giving up on anyone. I'm here to fight for every vote.
Smart move, strategically speaking. Going there in person, talking directly to voters, even in potentially hostile territory, shows he's serious about understanding their concerns, plays right into that man-of-the-people image he's got going on.
No doubt. Now, switching gears a bit, they also went into some pretty controversial social issues, specifically transgender athletes in women's sports and gender-affirming surgery for inmates. And they really went that they even featured a mother whose daughter was, really tragically, murdered by an inmate who later had gender reassignment surgery while on death row. Tough segment, really makes you think.
It's a heartbreaking story, no doubt. Really highlights how complex and sensitive these issues are. It's not just some abstract debate. There are real people, real families at the heart of this. Finding solutions that balance everyone's rights with compassion is incredibly tough.
You're telling me. And that's where it gets even trickier. They mentioned this poll that found a majority of voters actually oppose transgender athletes competing in women's sports. Look, I'm not trying to tell anyone what to think, but it's definitely something to consider. What are your thoughts on that, especially given everything else we've just talked about?
Yeah, it really shows how these issues tap into deep-seated beliefs, right? People are passionate about this stuff. Easy to get caught up in the emotions, but it's important to remember there's more than one side to every story.
Absolutely. It's like, how do you even begin to navigate all these different opinions, different lived experiences, and then try to figure out where you stand on something so personal?
Exactly. It's more about listening than shouting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Trying to actually understand where someone else is coming from, even if you don't agree.
100%. Well said. All right, shifting gears completely here. The report also jumped into Israel's recent victory over Hamas. Obviously, huge implications globally.
Huge. And the report really didn't shy away from how brutal it was. Emphasized the death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. They even showed the drone footage of that operation.
Oh, no kidding. That's intense.
Hmm.
Really puts things in perspective. But even with Sinwar gone, sounds like the fight's far from over.
Exactly. The report made it clear this was just one battle, right? A small piece of a much bigger, much longer war. And while Israel's calling it a victory, they're still really worried about those hostages Hamas is holding. Really makes you think, even when someone's declaring victory, there's still so much loss.
Makes you wonder, will there ever be a real lasting peace there? It's just been conflict after conflict.
It's tough, and they actually use that conflict as a jumping off point to talk about, U.S. foreign policy in general. They had this interview with Congressman Corey Mills, the Republican from Florida.
Right, right. He's on those armed services and foreign affairs committees. Yeah. I bet he had some thoughts.
Oh, yeah. Congressman Mills was basically saying that what Israel did, while justified, it kind of shows how much America needs to step up and support their allies. He even went so far as to say Israel's having to, pick up the slack because the Biden administration is being too soft on the world stage.
Yeah, that's going to ruffle some feathers. Seems like he's trying to connect this whole conflict to the election, paint it as a strong leader versus weak leader kind of thing.
Exactly. It's textbook election strategy. Take something happening globally and tie it back to domestic politics. Use it to draw those lines in the sand between candidates. Plays into people's fears about national security, who's going to keep us safe?
It's all about the narrative, right? Frame it the right way, get people fired up, get them to the polls.
Exactly, which is why we got to be savvy consumers of this stuff. Think critically, question everything.
Couldn't agree more. So we've covered a lot of ground. Immigration, election integrity, swing states, social issues, international conflicts. This Fox News report was like a highlight reel of hot-button election topics.
It really was. And as serious as some of these issues are, it's good to remember there are real people at the heart of them.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the political back and forth, but these issues have real consequences for everyday people. Families struggling to get by, parents worried about their kids, communities fighting for a better life.
That's what it all boils down to.
Yeah.
Which is why we got to stay informed, stay engaged, make our voices heard, get out there and vote.
Preach. Every vote counts.
Yeah. But before we wrap up, got to circle back to something you said earlier about getting different perspectives. We've been dissecting this one Fox News report, which is just one way of looking at things, right?
Totally. It's like we're looking at just one little piece of a much bigger puzzle, To really wrap our heads around these issues, got to zoom out, see the whole picture, different angles, different sources, the whole shebang.
Easier said than done sometimes. It's so easy to get stuck in our own little bubbles, especially with how social media works these days, always feeding us the same stuff. True, takes a little more effort, but it's worth it. Seek out those news sources that challenge your views. Listen to podcasts you wouldn't normally, read articles from all sides, expose yourself to different opinions, have those conversations with people who see things differently.
Be open-minded, right? Learn from each other, even when it's tough.
Exactly. Doesn't mean you have to change your mind, but at least you're testing your own beliefs, seeing things from another angle.
Makes you a more informed citizen, right? You can have those real discussions, make decisions based on facts, not just what you're being told.
100%. And realizing that most of these issues, they're not black and white, There's a lot of gray area, a lot of nuance.
Got to embrace the messiness of it all.
That's where the real learning happens, right? When you get uncomfortable, you start questioning things.
That's how you grow, how you
Wow.
become a more engaged, more empathetic person.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So as we head into these final weeks before the election, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from all of this?
At the end of the day, our democracy, it only works if we're all informed and engaged. Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, go vote. Your voice matters, every single one.
Couldn't agree more. Every vote makes a difference. Well, that's a wrap for today's deep dive. We hope this got you thinking, got you fired up to engage in those tough conversations, and most importantly, to exercise that right to vote. Thanks for joining us.